Chapter 1: The Man with the Calloused Hands. Dario's mornings were a study in precision. Wake at 7. Coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. Run through emails while classical jazz played softly in the background. Shower, shave, button-down shirt, always pressed. He left his apartment by 8:15, walked exactly 4 blocks to the publishing house where he worked as an editorial consultant, and slipped into his glass-paneled office like a ghost wearing cologne. He liked his life quiet, predictable, intact. No one would guess, no one could guess, that Dario hadn't been hugged in over 4 years, that he could remember every accidental brush of fingers with excruciating clarity, that even as he laughed at office parties, flirted with authors over tapas, and gave impressively cold takes in his weekly book club, he carried a shame he never put into words. He had never been chosen, never been truly touched like it meant something. And he'd gotten good at pretending that didn't bother him, which is why it was a cruel joke that he ended up winning anything at all. "It's just a fundraiser, Dee," his friend Hazel had said, dragging him to the event like a stubborn dog on a leash. "Eat the free hors d'oeuvres. Smile, pretend to be a functioning member of society." He did. He even dropped a few raffle tickets into the box labeled "Custom Woodwork by Lincoln Ash," mostly to get Hazel off his back. And then, somehow, he won. A bookshelf. Custom built. Made by hand. Delivered and installed. Dario didn't like wood, or strangers in his space. But Hazel looked so delighted when she texted him the next day, "You're finally getting something useful, and maybe hot furniture guy will knock some joy into you," that he couldn't back out. Which is how he found himself standing in his apartment, espresso cup in hand, pretending not to pace. There was a knock. 3 slow measured taps. Dario opened the door and forgot how to breathe. The man standing there was tall, broad, wearing a dark Henley rolled to the elbows, soft flannel shirt tied around his waist, work boots scuffed from actual labor. His skin was sun-warmed, lightly dusted with freckles, and his beard was the kind that should come with a caution sign. One arm carried a leather tool bag. The other rested casually at his side, revealing forearms inked with soft, winding tattoos, cursive words, and blooming vines. And then there were his hands. Big, rough, calloused, crafted by years of shaping things that lasted. "Dario," the man asked, voice low and a little gravelly, like he just cleared his throat with bourbon and a secret. Dario nodded. "That's me." "I'm Lincoln." Of course he was. He stepped inside with a quiet confidence, glancing once around the room. His eyes didn't linger long, but he seemed to take everything in. Books stacked by genre on the floor, the barren wall where the shelf would go, the sleek but impersonal decor. "I brought some samples," Lincoln said, kneeling down to open his tool bag. His jeans tugged taut over solid thighs, and Dario, a grown man with allegedly functional self-control, had to look away before he made an actual noise. "So," Lincoln said, pulling out wood swatches and lining them on the coffee table, "let's talk about what kind of stories you want to surround yourself with." Dario blinked. "I what?" "The shelf," Lincoln clarified, not looking up. "It's not just wood. It's how it makes you feel. Some people want something warm, cozy. Others want sleek, modern, don't touch me, I'm art vibes." "I'm definitely in the don't touch me camp," Dario muttered without thinking. Lincoln glanced up. His eyes were warm, hazel, with flecks of gold that made Dario's chest tighten. But he didn't comment on the joke, didn't press. Instead, he pointed to a deeper oak grain. "This one feels like stories told by firelight. Comfort reads." Dario stared. "How would you even?" Lincoln grinned. "I read too. Used to be a numbers guy, but books got me through some rough years. Wood and words, they both leave a mark." Dario said nothing. He was too busy trying not to imagine how those hands would feel leaving marks. They moved to the wall. Lincoln held up his measuring tape and extended it. "Hold the end here for me." Dario hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed. Just for a second. But it was enough. A bolt of heat lanced through him. Not sexual. Not exactly. Just alive. A forgotten sensation that made him ache. Lincoln noticed. His eyes softened, but he didn't apologize, didn't make it awkward. He simply stepped back, adjusted the tape, and said, "You okay with a corner piece? Could give it more presence." "Fine," Dario croaked. Lincoln's hand grazed his waist as he moved past him to check the angle. It wasn't a grope, not even an intentional touch, just a firm, gentle pressure, guiding Dario slightly to the side. Dario stood frozen. It was the first time in years that someone had touched him casually without pity or agenda, and it didn't make him want to crawl out of his skin. He realized he was holding his breath. "All right," Lincoln said, rolling the tape back in with a snap. "I'll draw up a design tonight. Mind if I text you a sketch tomorrow?" "Sure," Dario said, voice barely audible. Lincoln glanced around one last time. "You've got good taste in books. The atmosphere's nice, just missing a touch of warmth." "Isn't that what the shelf is for?" Dario tried to say lightly. Lincoln smiled. "Partly, but sometimes it's the person standing next to it that makes the room feel full." Dario didn't know what to say to that. Lincoln grabbed his bag and walked to the door. "I'll be in touch soon." Then he was gone. Dario stood alone in the silence, still feeling the echo of those calloused fingers against his waist, the warmth of a gaze that didn't ask anything of him, but didn't look away either. He sat down slowly on the couch, blinked a few times, and muttered to no one, "Well, shit!" Chapter 2: A Touch of Sawdust and Safety. Dario told himself to stay in his office. It was the reasonable, adult, emotionally distant thing to do. Lincoln was in the living room, working on the shelf. There was no need for Dario to hover, or worse, linger. So he stayed at his desk for 5 minutes, maybe 6. He even typed half an email. But then he heard it. A low, soft hum, almost a melody drifting in like sunlight through half-closed blinds. A tune without words, made warmer by the faint sound of wood being shaped, smoothed, coaxed into something useful. The scent of cedar drifted under his door. Dario shut his laptop. By the time he padded barefoot into the living room, Lincoln had removed his flannel and tossed it over the arm of the couch. He stood in a black t-shirt, rolled at the sleeves, sawdust flecking his forearms and catching in the ink that twined along his skin. His movements were fluid, practiced, measured strokes of a sanding block over freshly cut wood. Dario watched for a second too long. "I didn't mean to disturb," he said stiffly. "Just passing through." Lincoln didn't look up. "You live here. You're allowed to pass wherever you want." Dario leaned against the wall, trying very hard not to appear interested in the way Lincoln's back moved when he bent slightly forward. "You hum when you work." Lincoln smiled without stopping. "Only when I'm in a good mood." "Am I your good mood?" The words slipped out before Dario could stop them, winced. Lincoln glanced at him with a smirk, worn and firm and unbothered. "Guess you'll have to keep coming out of your office to find out." Dario didn't answer. But he stayed. For the next hour, he floated in and out of the room, pretending to check his phone, then his bookshelf, then the non-existent dust on his coffee table. Each time he found himself slowing, pausing, watching Lincoln's hands. Those hands never hurried, never fumbled. Lincoln didn't talk much unless Dario spoke first, but when he did, he always said something that lingered in the air like smoke. "Where'd you learn to do all this?" Dario finally asked. "My dad," Lincoln said, wiping sweat from his brow with the hem of his shirt and revealing a tantalizing glimpse of toned stomach beneath. "He was a carpenter, built houses during the day, toys for me at night. I picked it up naturally, but I was pushed toward something more practical." Dario raised a brow. "Let me guess, finance?" "Bingo," Lincoln chuckled. "Suits, spreadsheets, overpriced lunch meetings. I lasted 5 years, then he got sick, real fast. Didn't leave much behind except a shop full of tools and half-finished dreams. I sold the suits, kept the saw." Dario stared at him, unsure what to say. Lincoln handed him a piece of sandpaper. "Want to try?" Dario blinked. "I'm not good with that kind of thing." "You don't have to be good. Just curious." He didn't take it. Just shoved his hands in his pockets and said, "I'm more of a watch from afar and pretend I'm not invested kind of guy." Lincoln didn't look offended. He simply set the sandpaper down on the table and went back to work like it didn't matter. And maybe that's what made it matter. Later, when the frame was assembled and Lincoln was securing the last brackets, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Greenbaum, Dario's upstairs neighbor, a sprightly woman in her late 60s, wearing fuchsia lipstick and a scarf with actual cat ears. "Oh, I just wanted to bring you some of my banana bread," she said cheerily, handing over a foil-wrapped bundle. Her eyes flicked to Lincoln. "And I wanted to see this boyfriend you keep hiding." Dario nearly dropped the bread. "He's not." Lincoln held up a hand, calm as ever. "I work with wood, ma'am. Not relationships, but I do take bribes in the form of baked goods." Mrs. Greenbaum winked. Handsome and polite. If he ever gets tired of you, Dario, send him upstairs. Dario made a strangled noise. Lincoln just smiled and waved goodbye. When the door shut, Dario turned to him. You didn't correct her. I didn't see the point. She's already planning our wedding in her head. Dario stared. You're enjoying this. Maybe a little. Dario flushed. You're impossible. I'm efficient, Lincoln replied, eyes crinkling. Shelf's done, by the way. Want to come inspect it? Dario walked over and stood in front of the finished piece. It was stunning. Deep, warm wood, curved edges, and small, subtle engravings along the bottom, like the spines of ancient books. It's... He trailed off. He didn't know how to describe the feeling of something being made for him. Lincoln shrugged. You don't have to say anything. Just enjoy it. There was a pause. Then Lincoln added, voice softer now. If you ever want to come by the workshop, let me know. I've got a project bench open. Good place to think. Or not think. Dario folded his arms. I'm not a build stuff with my hands kind of guy. Lincoln raised an eyebrow. You said that already. I'm not trying to convert you, Dario. Just offering a place where you can breathe different air for a bit. Dario didn't respond, just nodded stiffly. But that night, when he stood alone in front of the shelf, he ran his fingers along the smooth grain and whispered, Different air, huh? The next day, Dario found himself outside Lincoln's workshop. It was unassuming, nestled between a bakery and a thrift store on a quieter street near downtown. The front door was propped open with a tree stump, and the scent of sawdust hit him like a memory he didn't have. He almost turned around. Almost. But then Lincoln looked up from a workbench inside, eyes lighting up. Not with surprise, but with something warmer. Thought you might show up. I had a meeting cancel, Dario lied. Lucky me, Lincoln said easily. The shop was filled with half-built tables, wooden panels leaning against walls, jars of nails, brushes, and carved details. Music played softly from a dusty speaker in the corner, something bluesy and low. Lincoln handed Dario a water bottle and gestured toward a partially built bench. You can sit there, just don't lean too far back. It's not finished. Dario perched carefully. The bench groaned, then collapsed. He yelped as he lost balance, but Lincoln was there in an instant. One hand wrapped around his arm, the other at his back, steadying him before he hit the floor. Dario landed against Lincoln's chest, breath knocked out, face way too close to a jawline that looked carved by the same tools on the wall. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Dario pushed back, cheeks burning. I'm fine. Totally fine. Your death trap of a bench, however, was clearly jealous, Lincoln said, laughter crinkling the corners of his eyes, of you sitting on it before it had time to impress you. Dario stared, flustered, then turned on his heel and made for the door. I'm going home. Don't forget your water, Lincoln called. Dario flipped him off without looking back, but he was smiling. He hated that he was smiling. He hated it even more that Lincoln would notice and not say a word. He didn't take the water bottle, but he held on to the scent of cedar and the sound of Lincoln's laugh all the way home. Chapter 3. The Workshop and the Wall. The workshop smelled different this time, not just sawdust and oil, but something more grounded, earthy, warm, like pine sap and old dreams. The kind of scent that lived in the cracks of wooden floors and stuck to the back of your throat in the best way. Dario paused in the doorway. A beam of morning light filtered through the wide window panes, casting golden lines across the mess of half-finished tables, shelves, and tools hung in a quiet kind of order. Lincoln was bent over a table in the back, head tilted, tongue caught between his teeth as he worked. His dark shirt clung to his back in the morning heat, sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing tan skin and ink that peeked past his biceps. Dario hated that he noticed that first. Hated more how he stayed. You're here early, Lincoln said without turning. His voice, like always, was calm, settled, like he never had to rush for anything in his life. I had time, Dario replied, and Hazel's been nagging me to stop being a hermit. Lincoln chuckled. So I'm the lesser evil? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Dario stepped further in, careful not to bump anything. There was a delicate quality to the chaos, controlled, intentional. Nothing felt abandoned. Everything had a purpose, even if it wasn't immediately obvious. What's this one? Dario asked, gesturing toward the table Lincoln had been carving. Lincoln ran a hand across the surface, smooth but not finished. The legs were thick, sturdy, the top slightly curved, with small notches and edges that felt alive. "My dad started it years ago," Lincoln said, tone quieter now. "He was going to gift it to my mom for their anniversary, but he never finished. I found it in storage after he passed. Decided it was time." Dario didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. Lincoln didn't seem to mind the silence. He tapped the edge of the wood gently. "Want to help me sand it?" Dario looked at him like he'd offered to hand over his spleen. "I don't want to ruin it." "You won't." "I don't know what I'm doing." Lincoln offered a sanding block, patient and steady. "I'll show you." But Dario shook his head. "No, I'm fine just watching." Lincoln nodded once, didn't push, just went back to sanding, humming something low again, like he did when he was completely at ease. And Dario stood there too long. Eventually, Lincoln broke the silence. "Why'd you really come back?" Dario looked down. "Because you said I could." Lincoln didn't smile, but something about him softened. They moved around each other for the next hour, Dario watching while Lincoln worked. The man's hands moved like they'd memorized every grain of the wood, gentle when needed, firm when shaping corners. No hesitation, no second guessing. Dario envied that. At some point, Lincoln took a break, wiping sweat from his brow and cracking open a bottle of water. He handed one to Dario without thinking. This time, Dario took it. Their fingers brushed. He didn't move away. The touch wasn't dramatic, just real. Skin meeting skin for a fraction of a second, but it lingered like a fingerprint on glass. Lincoln said nothing. But his gaze dropped to Dario's hand, then rose slowly to meet his eyes. Dario looked away first. They stood side by side in silence, leaning against the same work table. There was a hum of electricity in the air, unspoken things buzzing between them like static. "I've never been in a real relationship," Dario said suddenly. Lincoln didn't react, just sipped his water. "Okay." "I mean," Dario continued, voice tighter now, "I've had flings, things that barely lasted, but nothing that meant anything. Nothing with weight, nothing that—" He stopped, breathed. "Nothing that stayed." Lincoln nodded slowly. "That happened by choice or circumstance?" "I don't know." Dario's fingers gripped the water bottle too tight. "I guess I always found it easier to keep people where they couldn't reach me. Safer, cleaner. And lonelier?" Lincoln asked, not accusing, just asking. Dario didn't answer. He didn't have to. Lincoln let the silence stretch, then said gently, "I get it. Some of us were taught silence before we even knew what it meant." Dario's throat tightened. He stared hard at the table, like he could disappear into the wood. "People always think I'm fine, because I'm not broken in obvious ways." "You don't have to look broken to be hurting." Dario blinked fast. "I hate that you say things like that so casually." Lincoln's lips quirked into a half-smile. "Sorry, it's a reflex." There was a pause. Then Dario reached forward, hesitating only a second before his fingers wrapped around the second sanding block Lincoln had set down earlier. "Show me?" he asked, quiet. Lincoln's eyes flicked to him. He didn't grin, didn't tease. Just stepped closer, guiding Dario's hand with his own. Slow, careful. Their fingers overlapped. Skin against skin again. "Light pressure," Lincoln murmured. "Let the grit do the work. Just follow the grain." Dario nodded. His hands shook slightly. Lincoln didn't mention it. They moved together, side by side, smoothing the surface of a memory. Later, Dario caught Lincoln watching him, not working, not speaking, just looking. Like Dario was something he hadn't quite figured out how to name yet. It made Dario panic. "I should go," he blurted, stepping back. "I've got edits. Manuscript deadlines." Lincoln didn't stop him, just said, "You know where to find me." Dario left. That night, he lay in bed, fingers twitching where Lincoln's had touched them. He dreamed, not of sex, not really, but of being held. Of hands cupping his face gently, of being looked at like he was more than tolerable, more than convenient. He woke up breathless, sheets tangled, and for the first time in years, he ached for something he didn't know how to ask for. Not perfection, just someone who stayed. Chapter 4. The Storm and the Sleepover. Dario didn't notice the storm until it swallowed the sun. 1 second, the afternoon light was slanting through his living room windows, catching the golden edge of the bookshelf Lincoln had built. The next, it was gone, replaced by a bruised sky, low thunder, and the sudden, suffocating stillness that always came just before everything fell apart. He stood by the kitchen sink, mug halfway to his lips, watching rain pelt the glass in frantic sheets. A gust of wind rattled the back windows. Then, with a flicker and a breathless blink, everything went dark. The power cut out. Dario stood there in the silence, heart strangely steady. Of course the storm would knock the power. Of course the food in his fridge would go to waste. Of course the weather would decide tonight, of all nights, to isolate him. He lit a candle from the emergency drawer, its soft glow throwing shadows on the walls. It flickered across the room, brushing against the wood grain of the shelf Lincoln had stained with his own hands. He didn't expect the knock. 3 taps. Familiar. Dario hesitated, then opened the door. Lincoln stood there, soaked from the shoulders down, dark shirt clinging to his frame, flashlight in one hand, an umbrella in the other, only partially effective, apparently. "I saw the street was out," Lincoln said. "Figured you'd be making tea by candlelight and pretending to enjoy the aesthetic while slowly spiraling into cabin fever." Dario raised a brow. "Do I look like someone who spirals?" "You look like someone who alphatizes their anxiety." Dario bit back a laugh. "You want to come in, or are you planning to flirt from the hallway all night?" Lincoln grinned, stepping in. "Depends. Do you have food?" "Chinese leftovers. Don't judge me." "I would never." Within minutes, Dario had lit 3 more candles. The apartment glowed in soft amber hues, the storm muttering just outside the walls. They sat cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table, cartons of noodles and dumplings spread between them. Lincoln's damp flannel hung over a chair to dry, and he looked completely at home in Dario's space. Barefoot, relaxed, chopsticks in hand. It unnerved Dario how easily Lincoln fit into his world, how his laugh filled the empty spaces without echo. "You always this calm during blackouts?" Dario asked, sipping lukewarm tea. "I like storms," Lincoln said. "They remind me that not everything needs fixing right away. Sometimes things just shake a little." Dario poked at his rice. "You talk like a fortune cookie." Lincoln shrugged. "I read a lot of fortune cookies." For a while they just ate. The thunder rolled closer, then drifted. Dario broke the silence first. "You ever been in love?" Lincoln paused mid-bite. "Yeah." Dario watched him. "What happened?" Lincoln set his carton down and leaned back, resting on one hand. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. "We were 19. Thought we knew everything. He wanted the world, and I wanted him. I thought if I just waited long enough, loved hard enough, he'd stay." Dario didn't breathe. "But love doesn't work like that," Lincoln continued. "You can't rush someone into being ready. You just wait. If they come back, maybe it's real. If they don't..." It still mattered. Dario looked down. His voice came out tight. "No one's ever waited for me." Lincoln turned his head. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dario said, setting his chopsticks aside, "I've never been the person someone picked. Not in school, not in friendships, not even in my own family. I was the background noise. The easy choice to skip over." He swallowed hard. His voice grew colder, more practiced. "So I stopped trying, made myself too sharp to hold, built a life no one could enter without permission. And guess what? No one ever asked to come in." Lincoln didn't speak. The candle flickered. Dario's hands clenched in his lap. "I've never been someone people pick." There it was, the truth. Ugly, bare, and burning. Lincoln shifted slowly, moved closer. He didn't speak, didn't argue. He just reached out, one hand moving with deliberate slowness until his calloused palm cupped Dario's cheek. Dario flinched, just once, then stilled. The touch was warm, grounding. His skin prickled, not with fear, but with something ancient and trembling. He didn't mean to cry. But the tears came, hot and sudden and humiliating. He turned his face toward Lincoln's hand like it was the only solid thing left in the room. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" Lincoln asked softly. "I don't know." Lincoln didn't let go. "Then let me choose you now." The words cracked something inside Dario, like a fault line giving way to something gentler underneath. They didn't kiss, didn't fall into each other. Instead, they sat in silence. Lincoln's thumb brushed across Dario's cheekbone once, and Dario leaned. That night, the storm raged outside, but the apartment held its quiet. They ended up in bed, not like lovers, not yet, but like 2 people who didn't want to be alone. They lay side by side, the sheets cool between them, not touching. Lincoln kept his distance, letting Dario choose. Dario stared at the ceiling, listening to the thunder fade into soft rain. Then, slowly, he rolled over. One arm draped across Lincoln's chest, one leg curled against his. His head found the hollow of Lincoln's shoulder. Lincoln didn't move. Just let him settle. And in the quiet, in the warmth of a storm-wrapped room, Dario finally fell asleep with someone's hand near enough to reach for. He woke up, wrapped in arms that didn't flinch, and for the first time in his life, he didn't wake up alone. Chapter 5. The Almost and the After. Everything was different now. Not loud, not flashy, but undeniably different. Dario still woke up alone most mornings, still checked his email before brushing his teeth, still alphabetized the books on his nightstand out of sheer compulsion. But he also, without really meaning to, started leaving space on the edge of his bed. He caught himself glancing at the street when he heard boots on the stairs, and when his phone lit up with Lincoln and a simple, "You eat today?" He never ignored it. They weren't dating. There'd been no declaration, no labels. But Lincoln had spent the night, held him through the quiet hum of a retreating storm, and Dario had woken up safe. That counted for something. "5 kinds of jam, Dario?" Lincoln asked, holding up the glass jars like they were evidence in a trial. "Are you starting a black market fruit spread empire?" "I am a man of layered moods," Dario replied, coolly dropping another jar into the basket. "Some days I'm a tart cherry. Other days I'm a sensual apricot." Lincoln tried very hard not to laugh. "Sensual apricot is going on your tombstone." They strolled through the aisles, the domesticity of it all quietly intoxicating. Dario in his dark jeans and neatly rolled sleeves, Lincoln in a simple Henley with his hands casually tucked into his pockets. They looked like they did this often. They didn't, but Dario was starting to wish they would. They bickered about pasta shapes. Lincoln liked the long, elegant ones, spaghetti fettuccine, while Dario swore by bow ties and shells. They paused too long in the produce section, debating which apples were superior, while an elderly couple watched them with thinly veiled amusement. When they reached checkout, Lincoln leaned just a little closer than usual. "You always shop like this?" "Like what?" "Like you're trying to hide behind your grocery list." Dario blinked. "I'm not." "I know," Lincoln murmured. "You're just used to not being seen." Dario didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside the store, the clouds had cleared, the sidewalk sparkled with leftover rain, and everything smelled like pavement and possibility. Dario was adjusting a paper bag under his arm when a too familiar voice called his name. "Dario?" He turned. "Anthony." Of course. Tan, smug, expensive smile Anthony. His former colleague, his brief mistake, his long-standing shame. The man who once made Dario feel like love was something you earned with obedience. Dario straightened instinctively. Anthony looked him over. "Still in the city? Huh. I thought you'd have moved on by now, or at least moved up." Lincoln stepped closer, expression unreadable. Anthony's gaze slid to him. "And this is?" "Lincoln," Dario said, trying to keep his voice steady. "A friend." Anthony's smile curled. "Sure. Right? Well, hey, whatever keeps you company, some people are better at pretending than actually being chosen, huh?" Dario felt it in his stomach, a cold, sinking thing. Shame, fast and sharp. He looked down, then Lincoln's arm slid around his waist. Firm, steady. He pulled Dario just enough into his side and said, voice calm and unshakable, "He's not pretending, and he's not alone." Anthony blinked, a pause, a forced chuckle. "Well, all right then. Good for you." He left. Dario didn't move for several seconds. Lincoln didn't let go. "Are you okay?" Lincoln asked, quieter now. Dario nodded once. "I hate him." "I know. And I hate that he still makes me feel like I'm 13 and invisible." Lincoln's hand slid to the small of his back. "You're not invisible." Dario looked up at him, and for the first time he leaned in. They made it up to Dario's apartment with the groceries still in their arms and the tension thick between them. The moment the door clicked shut, Dario set the bags down and turned. Lincoln was watching him. Not pressing, just there. Like always. Dario crossed the space between them in 3 quiet steps and kissed him. It was clumsy, his hand caught on Lincoln's shirt, his breath tangled in his throat. But Lincoln didn't laugh or flinch. He kissed back. Slow. Steady. Like he'd been waiting for this. Not demanding it, not expecting it. Just waiting. One hand slid up to cradle Dario's jaw, the other anchoring at his waist. Dario melted into it. It was messy. Breathless. Not perfect. And all the more real for it. They stumbled into the wall, lips parting only long enough to catch air. Dario's fingers gripped Lincoln's shirt like he needed it to stay grounded. Lincoln kissed him like he was fragile and precious all at once, like the world could burn and he wouldn't stop holding him. When they finally pulled back, Dario's chest heaved. His cheeks were flushed, his lips kiss-bruised. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, voice shaking. "You don't have to know," Lincoln murmured. "You just have to want it." Dario nodded, then whispered, "Don't go." Lincoln rested his forehead against Dario's. "I wasn't planning to." They didn't sleep together, not fully. But they curled into each other on the bed, half-dressed, hearts racing. Lincoln lay on his back, one arm curled beneath Dario, the other tracing slow circles on his shoulder. Dario didn't speak for a long time. Then, against the silence, he murmured, "He made me feel like wanting affection was pathetic." Lincoln's grip tightened slightly. "He was wrong. I think I believed him. Then I'll stay until you don't." Dario exhaled. He didn't cry this time, just breathed in the scent of sawdust and skin, let Lincoln's heartbeat thud gently beneath his cheek, and closed his eyes. The world was quiet, and he wasn't alone. Chapter 6. The Love You Wait For. The workshop was empty when Dario stepped inside. It was a Sunday. Sunlight spilled in through the high windows, painting golden bars across the floor. The air smelled like varnish and pine, and the place was quiet, in that way sacred spaces often are, like the silence itself had been shaped by hand. Dario hesitated at the door. He wasn't even sure why he'd come without texting first. Maybe he needed the quiet. Or maybe, finally, he was ready to leave something behind. He set the book down carefully on Lincoln's project bench, a slim, well-worn paperback. The cover read in soft lettering, "How to Love Someone Who Doesn't Know They're Worth It." He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. The next morning, Lincoln showed up at Dario's door with 2 cups of coffee, a piece of walnut wood tucked under one arm, and a look in his eyes like someone who'd found a secret he wasn't going to hide anymore. "New project," he said. Dario raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "A headboard. You need one." "I have one." Lincoln smirked. "You have a rectangle with screws." Dario tried not to smile. "You're bossy when you're inspired." Lincoln held up the coffee. "I brought bribes." "Fine, but I get design input. You're insufferable. I'm particular." Lincoln's grin was sunlight. "Same thing." They spent the weekend building it together. The process was messy and slow and full of laughter. Dario kept arguing about edges being too sharp, and Lincoln kept teasing that he'd become a design diva. At one point, Dario got wood glue on his cheek, and Lincoln wiped it away with his thumb, lingering just a second too long. They didn't talk about what they were doing, but every glance, every shared moment, carried a tenderness that felt deeper than words. Dario wasn't used to this kind of closeness, but he didn't run from it either. When they finished, the headboard was beautiful. Wide, smooth wood with soft curves and a hand-carved detail in the corner, something Dario had sketched without thinking. A single open book, pages fluttering. "I like that it feels like it belongs," Dario said, running his hand along the grain. Lincoln looked at him. "It does." They carried it into Dario's bedroom together, the weight shared between them. They bolted it in, adjusted the pillows, and stood back. And then they didn't move. The sunlight had dimmed to dusk. The room felt quieter than it had ever been, like even the walls were holding their breath. Lincoln stepped closer. Dario's pulse thudded, but he didn't step back. Their eyes met. And in the space between breath and heartbeat, Dario whispered, "I want this." Lincoln's voice was low. "You sure?" Dario nodded once. "I want you." The kiss started slow. It wasn't hungry or desperate. It was something else. Reverent. Lincoln kissed him like Dario was something fragile and divine. His hands were calloused but careful, mapping skin like a prayer. Dario's shirt hit the floor, then Lincoln's. And then the rest followed in a slow unraveling of fear, hesitation, and every lonely night neither of them had spoken about. They didn't rush. There were soft moans and startled gasps, quiet laughter when Dario's knee hit the corner of the bed. Lincoln kissed the edge of his jaw down the slope of his throat, murmuring things that Dario wouldn't remember later, but would feel in his bones. When they came together, it wasn't about performance. It was about permission, about letting someone see and still stay. Later, breath still ragged and skin flushed, Lincoln pulled Dario against his chest. His fingers traced the line of Dario's jaw, slow and steady. "You don't have to be touched to be real," Lincoln whispered. "But you deserve to be touched like you're the most real thing in the world." Dario's throat closed up. He didn't say anything. just curled into him, fingers lightly brushing Lincoln's chest like he was still making sure he was real. They lay like that for a long time. At some point, they got up and pulled on soft shirts and boxers. Lincoln made tea. Dario lit a candle. Then they climbed back into bed and opened a book. Lincoln read aloud in a low, soothing voice while Dario rested his head on his shoulder, their legs tangled together under the sheets, the words blurred into background music. The warmth between them was a quiet song of its own. Eventually, Dario closed the book. The room was silent again. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. I think I was just waiting for someone who wouldn't leave when I needed them most. Lincoln took his hand and kissed his knuckles. Then I guess we both waited long enough. Dario looked down at their fingers, curled together on the blanket. "I've never been touched," he said softly. "Never been chosen." He turned, met Lincoln's eyes. "But somehow, you keep showing up." His voice cracked. "And I think I'm finally choosing you back." Lincoln leaned in, kissed him gently, and in the quiet of that room, filled with light wood, soft breath, and the warmth of two people finally arriving where they were always meant to be, Dario finally let himself be wanted. And he stayed.